"Laugh all you want," Jessica whispered as her husband smirked across the courtroom. Everyone expected her to break. The billionaire CEO, his ruthless attorney, even the judge. A housewife representing herself? A disaster waiting to happen. But they didn't know the truth. Jessica wasn't unprepared. She was armed, with everything they'd buried. Bruno Sterling sat at the defense table like he owned the place, arm draped over his chair, grin wide. "Look at her, Silas," he said, not bothering to whisper. "Same cheap dress. She thinks this is a movie." His lawyer, Silas Blackwood, gave a thin smile. "Let her talk," he murmured. "Judge Henderson hates amateurs. She'll bury herself." Across the aisle, Jessica sat alone. No firm behind her, no wall of paper, just a yellow legal pad, a pen, and a plastic cup of water. Her hands shook so she locked them together in her lap. "All rise!" The bailiff's shout cracked through the room. Judge William Henderson walked in and took his seat. He opened the file and read the caption. "Sterling versus Sterling. Final hearing on asset division and spousal support. Appearances." Silas rose. "Silas Blackwood for the respondent, Mr. Bruno Sterling, Your Honor." The judge nodded and turned to the other table. Jessica stood. Her chair scraped across the floor. Bruno's shoulders shook with another suppressed laugh. "Jessica Sterling, Your Honor," she said, "representing myself." The judge stared at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Sterling," he said slowly, "your husband runs a company worth tens of millions. Mr. Blackwood has practiced here for 30 years. If you go forward alone, I will hold you to the same standard as him. No coaching. No special treatment. If you miss an objection, the evidence comes in. If you file the wrong motion, you lose. Do you understand?" "I can't afford an attorney," Jessica answered. "He cut off every account 6 months ago." Silas spoke at once. "Your Honor, my client merely protected the estate. We offered Mrs. Sterling a settlement of $50,000. She refused it." $50,000. Jessica kept her face still. She had watched Bruno spend more than that in one weekend on watches and wine. "For someone who came into the marriage with nothing, that is generous," the judge said. "Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise you to accept. Right now you're bringing a butter knife to a gunfight." Jessica lifted her head. "I understand, Your Honor," she said quietly. "And I still choose to proceed." "Very well," Judge Henderson said. "Mr. Blackwood, opening statement." Silas stepped into the center of the room. His voice slipped into that smooth, heavy tone juries trusted as he painted Bruno as the tireless visionary who built a logistics empire from nothing, and Jessica as the idle spouse who hosted lunches and spent money. When he finished, he sat. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, "your opening. Keep it brief." Jessica walked forward, clutching the yellow pad to her chest. She stopped halfway between Bruno and the bench. "My husband says I did nothing," she began. Her voice shook, then steadied. "He's right about one thing. I was a waitress when he met me. I didn't bring money into this marriage." Bruno rolled his eyes. "But this court," Jessica continued, "doesn't just look at who wrote the checks. It looks at the partnership. And today, I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me, Your Honor." She drew a breath. "I'm asking you to look at the assets my husband forgot to mention." The room went silent. Jessica felt every eye in the courtroom lock onto her, but she kept her gaze on the judge, not on Bruno's smirk, not on Silas's icy stare. Just the judge. "Proceed," Judge Henderson said. Jessica nodded. "Your Honor, for 10 years, I wasn't just hosting lunches. I ran our household so Bruno could run his company. But that's not the asset I'm referring to." She reached into a thin folder and pulled out a stack of papers. Her hands shook only slightly. Silas leaned toward Bruno. "Relax," he whispered. "There's nothing she can introduce without disclosure." Jessica heard him. She pretended she didn't. "May I approach?" she asked. The judge gestured for her to continue. Jessica handed him the documents. He flipped through the first few pages, then paused, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said sharply, "were these part of your discovery submission?" Silas frowned. "They shouldn't be anything relevant, Your Honor. Mrs. Sterling did not conduct discovery properly, so anything she found independently—" "Stop," the judge snapped. "These appear to be internal financial summaries from Sterling Freight Solutions." Jessica watched color drain from both men's faces. "These are confidential corporate documents, Your Honor," Silas said quickly. "They are privileged and cannot be used." Judge Henderson turned to Jessica. "Mrs. C. Sterling, where did you obtain these?" Jessica swallowed. "From my email." The courtroom stirred. Silas scoffed. "Impossible. Mrs. Sterling never held any position at Sterling Freight. She had no authorized access." "That's correct," Jessica said softly. "I wasn't given authorization, but I still received many of the documents because my husband used my email login to forward them to himself." Bruno shot upright. "That's a lie." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge barked. Jessica didn't flinch. "Your Honor, my husband used my email for years because he trusted that I never checked it. These documents were sitting in the archives. I didn't know what they were until after he cut me off financially." Silas scrambled. "Even if that's true, she lacks the expertise to interpret complex financial reports. She's grasping at shadows. Nothing here is relevant to divorce proceedings." Jessica lifted her chin. "They are relevant," she said, "because they show asset transfers." Silence. The judge looked back down at the papers with renewed focus. "Mrs. Sterling, explain." Jessica stepped toward the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, 6 months before filing for divorce, my husband moved 3 major assets, worth a combined £9.4 million, into a subsidiary company registered under a shell corporation in Gibraltar. He did this to make his net worth appear significantly smaller." Bruno's face went red. "You don't know what you're talking about." Jessica ignored him. "The Shell Corporation," she continued, "is owned by an executive assistant he's been seeing privately. She receives a salary of $400,000 for a position that does not exist." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge's jaw tightened. "Mr. Blackwood, is this true?" Silas stammered. I need time to review. These could be misinterpreted." Jessica spoke again, her voice steadier than ever. "I may not be an accountant, Your Honor, but I organized Bruno's files for 10 years. I typed his letters. I reviewed his invoices. I handled every household expense and every travel schedule. I know his patterns, and I know when he's hiding something." Bruno slammed his palm on the table. "You sneaky little—" "Another outburst and I will hold you in contempt," the judge warned. Jessica's heartbeat thundered in her ears, but her voice stayed calm. "There's more," she said quietly. Silas froze. Bruno stopped breathing. Judge Henderson leaned forward. "Mrs. Sterling, continue." The courtroom didn't breathe. Jessica's calm walk back to her table felt louder than Silas's entire speech. Her documents sat neatly in front of her. Only a few pages, but suddenly they felt heavier than everything Bruno's legal army had brought. Judge Henderson adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Sterling, you may proceed with your cross-examination." Jessica stood again. She didn't rush. She approached the witness stand with quiet steps that somehow rattled Anthony Rossi more than shouting ever could. "Mr. Rossi," she said softly, "earlier you stated that the internal accounts were clean. Correct?" Rossi cleared his throat. "Yes, clean and fully audited." Jessica nodded, almost kindly. "And you're familiar with every major transfer made under Sterling Dynamics?" "That is my job," Rossi replied, trying to steady himself. Jessica lifted one page from her folder. "Then help me understand this. On March 3rd of last year, Sterling Dynamics transferred $6 million to a consulting firm called Orion Group. Can you explain what services Orion provided?" Rossi blinked. "Consulting, expansions, strategic forecasting." Jessica tilted her head. Interesting, because according to Nevada state records, Orion Group has one employee, a receptionist, and no operational activity. Bruno shifted in his seat, tension radiating off him. Silas jumped up. Objection, she's making assumptions outside her expertise. Overruled, the judge said, not even looking at him. I want to hear where this goes. Jessica stepped closer. Mr. Rossi, could you state for the court the name of Orion Group's registered owner? Rossi swallowed, hard. I don't recall. Jessica placed another document on the podium. Then let me refresh your memory. The projector lit up. A name appeared on the screen. Tiffany Miller, the mistress. A ripple of shock traveled through the gallery. Bruno's jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. Rossi's shoulders slumped. I wasn't aware. Jessica didn't let him look away. So a company with no employees except a receptionist, owned by my husband's assistant, received $6 million from Sterling Dynamics, and you signed off on it. Silas cut in again. Your Honor, this line of questioning is designed to humiliate my client. It's designed to reveal the truth, the judge snapped. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. Jessica placed another sheet onto the stand. Mr. Rossi, one more question. Did you oversee a second transfer 8 months later, this time masked as operational restructuring? Rossi closed his eyes. I invoke the fifth. The room exploded in whispers. Jessica stepped back. No further questions. Rossi nearly collapsed back into his seat. Judge Henderson turned to Silas. Your witness? Silas hesitated. He knew any question would only dig the hole deeper. No questions, Your Honor. Jessica returned to her table, but she wasn't done. She picked up 3 documents, simple pages, nothing flashy, and handed them to the bailiff. Your Honor, she said, these are wire transfers and property deeds tying corporate funds directly to Bruno's personal life. They are clear evidence of dissipation of marital assets. Bruno finally snapped. This is a setup. She stole those files. The judge didn't even blink. Mr. Sterling, another outburst and you will be removed. Jessica didn't smile. She didn't need to. Everyone saw what she had just done. She had taken the first brick out of Bruno's empire, and the entire wall was beginning to crack. Silas rose slowly, looking less like a confident attorney and more like a man realizing he was defending a sinking ship. The judge motioned for the next witness, but Jessica had already stood up. Your Honor, she said, before Mr. Blackwood calls anyone, I request to enter one more piece of preliminary evidence. Silas stiffened. Objection. She can't just— Overruled, Judge Henderson said sharply. Mrs. Sterling has the floor. Jessica approached the projector again. Her posture was steady, but tension vibrated in her hands. She placed a small envelope onto the glass plate. When the projector lit up, the courtroom gasped. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said carefully. What is this? Jessica breathed out slowly. Audio recordings, Your Honor, 2 years' worth. Bruno's chair screeched across the floor as he shot to his feet. Absolutely not. That's illegal. Sit down, the judge thundered. One more interruption and you'll be removed from the courtroom. The room froze. Jessica continued, voice steadying with each word. New York is a one-party consent state. These recordings are legally obtained. They contain conversations between myself and my husband, conversations about hidden assets, forged signatures, and threats made against me during our marriage. Silas's face drained of color. Your Honor, we request an immediate authenticity review. These could be edited. They aren't, Jessica said, because I didn't come here alone. Murmurs spread across the room. Jessica nodded to the bailiff. The heavy wooden doors opened. A thin, exhausted man walked in, eyes hollow, hands trembling, suit loose on his frame. Dr. Eris Thorne. Bruno swore under his breath. Silas whispered, "You said he was gone." Jessica met their eyes calmly. "He contacted me last night." The judge leaned forward. "Dr. Thorne, please approach." The psychiatrist stepped to the stand, unable to hide the shame carved into his expression. "Dr. Thorne," Jessica began, "did you diagnose me with paranoid delusions in 2018? He nodded. "Yes." "And was that diagnosis accurate?" A long silence. "No," he whispered. The gallery erupted in gasps. The judge banged his gavel. "Proceed." Jessica moved closer. "Why did you falsify that diagnosis?" Dr. Thorne's voice cracked. "Because Bruno Sterling paid me. He said he needed proof you were unstable. He offered to clear my gambling debts." Bruno slammed his fist onto the table. "Liar!" "Enough!" the judge barked. Jessica didn't flinch. She lifted a page from her folder, an authenticated affidavit signed that very morning. "Dr. Thorne has already provided this statement to federal investigators," Jessica said. "He will testify that Bruno bribed him to destroy my credibility." Silas rubbed his temples, defeated. The judge exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Sterling, this is no longer a simple divorce trial. I am suspending further cross-examination until the court reviews these recordings." Jessica nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." She walked back to her seat, heart pounding. For the first time since the trial began, she wasn't just defending herself. She was uncovering a crime, and Bruno knew it. Because the moment she sat down, he leaned toward Silas and hissed, barely audible. She wasn't supposed to survive this. Jessica heard it. So did the judge, and the courtroom silence suddenly turned into something colder. Fear. Jessica didn't react when Bruno whispered the threat. She forced her gaze forward, hands folded, jaw set. But inside, adrenaline burned through her like fire. The judge had heard him. The court reporter had heard him. The gallery had heard him. The man who once mocked her for being delusional had finally exposed his own darkness in public. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Henderson said slowly, "approach the bench." Bruno rose reluctantly, Silas following with the defeated shuffle of a man already calculating the damage. They stood before the judge, whispering urgently. Jessica watched their silhouettes, the billionaire trembling, the attorney stiff with panic. For the first time, she truly saw fear radiating from Bruno, not arrogance. Moments later, the judge returned his attention to the courtroom. "We will resume," he announced. "Mr. Blackwood, call your witness." Silas tried to compose himself. The defense calls, "Mr. Anthony Rossi." The CFO walked in, stiff and pale, as though dragged into a spotlight he'd hoped to avoid. Just hours earlier, he had confidently denied everything. Now, after Dr. Thorne's confession and Bruno's outburst, he looked like a man reconsidering loyalty. Rossi was sworn in again. Silas began, "Mr. Rossi, as CFO, can you confirm whether Mrs. Sterling's allegations regarding hidden assets—" Before he could finish, Rossi's voice cracked. "I can't do this." Silas froze. "Excuse me." Rossi stared at the table, hands shaking. "I can't keep lying for him. I have a family. I have a daughter. If I go down for this, they lose everything." Bruno hissed, "Anthony, don't you dare." But Rossi lifted his gaze toward the judge. "Your Honor, the accounts Mrs. Sterling mentioned are real. The Cayman transfers, the Vanguard Trust, the shell companies. I handled the paperwork. I signed off under pressure." The gallery gasped. Jessica kept her breathing steady. "What kind of pressure?" the judge asked. Rossi swallowed hard. "Threats, job termination, blackmail. Mr. Sterling told me if I questioned a single transaction, he'd ruin me." I believed him. Silas buried his face in his hands. Jessica rose carefully. "Mr. Rossi, why come forward now?" He looked at her with guilt. "Because you weren't supposed to survive this divorce." When I heard him say that, I realized what kind of danger you were in. Bruno lunged from his seat. "You weak coward!" The bailiff grabbed him instantly. The judge erupted. "Mr. Sterling, another outburst will have you removed in shackles." Bruno twisted violently before freezing under the bailiff's grip. Rage contorted his face, but beneath it was unmistakable panic. Jessica stepped closer to Rossi. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly, "but there is more, isn't there? Something you didn't mention earlier." Rossi nodded slowly. "Yes, there's a system Bruno used. A private ledger, hidden behind encrypted payroll files." The judge leaned in. "Does this ledger still exist?" Rossi hesitated. Then, "Yes." Silas slammed his palm on the table. "Anthony!" But Rossi didn't stop. "And the only person besides me who knows its password—" He turned toward Jessica. "Is Mrs. Sterling." A wave of murmurs rose across the room. Jessica felt every eye settle on her. For years, Bruno had mocked her intelligence, called her useless, treated her like furniture. But the truth came out in a single sentence. She wasn't just a housewife. She was the one person who could destroy him completely. A hush rippled through the courtroom as Rossi's words settled like dust after an explosion. Jessica felt every eye in the room tilt toward her, some wide with disbelief, others with dawning respect. She didn't lift her chin in triumph. She stayed still, calm, steady, because she knew this wasn't the moment to celebrate. It was the moment to finish what she started. Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sterling, do you confirm you have access to this ledger?" Jessica stood. "I do, Your Honor, and I am prepared to provide it to the court." Bruno erupted. "That ledger is proprietary corporate." "Sit down," the judge thundered. The bailiff tightened his grip as Bruno dropped into his chair like a child forced into time-out. Silas didn't even look at him now. The attorney stared straight ahead, hollow, calculating the ruins of his own future. Jessica walked to the evidence table and placed a small USB drive onto it. "This contains a backup of the encrypted ledger," she said. "It auto-synced to our family cloud server. I downloaded it after Mr. Rossi confirmed its location." Silas shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we object." "On what grounds?" the judge snapped. Silas opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There were no grounds left. Judge Henderson leaned forward. "Mrs. Sterling, approach." Jessica stepped to the bench. Her palms were sweating, but her voice didn't waver as she spoke. "Your Honor, this isn't just about money. It's about what he did, the people he hurt, the employees he stole from, the lies he built his empire on." The judge nodded. "And you've proven your case, more thoroughly than many attorneys who have stood in this courtroom." Jessica stepped back to her table. She didn't sit. She stood tall, finally unafraid of the man who had once controlled every breath she took. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his tone sharp as steel, "the evidence presented establishes fraud, emotional abuse, financial deception, and misconduct beyond anything this court has seen in recent years." Bruno shook his head violently. "You can't do this. You can't." "You did this," the judge cut in, "and now the consequences arrive." Silas finally spoke, voice weak. "Your Honor." "Perhaps a recess." "No," Henderson said. "We're concluding." He turned to Jessica. "Mrs. Sterling, your request?" She met his eyes without fear. "Full control of the marital estate, authority to repay the pension fund, and protective oversight of all company shares until criminal proceedings conclude." The judge nodded slowly, almost reverently. "Approved." Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused mid-keystroke. Jessica didn't gasp. She only breathed, not in shock, but in release. Bruno surged to his feet once more. "You can't give her everything. She's nothing without me." The judge raised a finger. "Bailiff." In one smooth motion, the bailiff cuffed Bruno. The courtroom fell silent as the man who once ruled an empire looked around wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist. As he was dragged toward the exit, Jessica spoke softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "You shouldn't have underestimated the woman who built your life." Moments later, federal agents entered with a warrant. Bruno's fate shifted from divorce court to criminal custody. When the doors slammed behind him, Jessica finally sat down. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, only from the weight of survival. She had not just defended herself. She had dismantled a kingdom built on lies, and reclaimed her own name in the process.